if you get the 3D printer, it's going to come in this Pelican case. I'm going to show you what will come in the case here. It'll be, after you pop all the clips open on it, be able to open it up. And inside the case, we store 3D printer, there should be some filament, and an accessory box on it. The printer itself is pretty delicate for being jostled around, so you do want to, you don't have to be real careful with it, but you have to be a little bit to make sure you don't knock anything around too much. You don't want to drop it. It could damage some of the parts on it. So we'll go ahead and start by pulling the 3D printer out of the case. And I'll set it up right here on it. So this is the biggest part of it. There will be a probably a plastic tube that we have sitting inside. Don't lose that. That's an important part of the unit. And then pull out this accessory box where we have several of the pieces on it. So I'm going to bring this up over here. And inside this case, you should find one roll of filament. There might be a second roll if this roll is about empty on it. This is the media that the 3D printer prints from. Inside of it, you also will find the power supply for the unit and a power cord. Power cord plugs into the back. You should be able to find that pretty easy on it. Also included in the bag, but you probably won't know, well, you'll need also a little black piece like this. This is the filament holder. And we'll come back and I'll show you how that clips on here during the setup part of it. The rest of the pieces that are in the box, there is a bag of tools. Hopefully, I'm not expecting anyone will have to work on taking the machine apart, but it's want to keep all this stuff with the machine, so if it does need to have repairs or whatever, I can walk you through what needs to happen to it, or otherwise it'll be what I need to work on it when it's back in the office. Blue painter's tape on it. In the event that you need to recoat the build plate, the plate down here in the bottom, this tape is here what you'd use to put that particular part of it on. And miscellaneous other things that we won't worry about on this particular video. Okay, now that we have the unit unboxed, we'll move into the initial setup of the unit on it. So again, we should have the units. We have the unit itself. You're going to have this feed tube, plastic piece of tubing. You're going to have the filament holder and the filament on it. So to start off on, we'll go ahead and put the filament on the printer. And to make that a little bit easier, I'm going to spin the printer around backwards. And we're going to take, there's a little notch here, and it basically fits up in the hole, slides in, slides down. That's all there is to locking this particular piece onto the unit. Next thing is you'll take your spool of filament and go ahead, and if it's locked in, through the holes or something that'll hold it, you'll take that part of it out. Now it's important to know which direction this filament gets loaded onto it. You'll want to set it up so that when it pulls, it feeds from the bottom up to the inside. This is the way you want to have it pulled up. If you pull it the other way, it'll likely jam and cause problems with your printing setup onto it. So hole in the middle, really pretty easy. Round hole, round peg, slide the filament onto the spool holder. Then take your feed tube. Now this is only initial setup that we take this off when we box it and unbox it. If you need to change the filament while the unit is already set up, you could leave this mounted to it. But all we just do is feed the filament into, and if you look at one side, there's going to be like a lot of, probably won't show up on camera very well, but there's like a lot of teeth marks on one side a lot more than the other. This is the side that'll lock into the clips that are here on the back. But feed the filament into the hole and just go ahead and run the filament in through the hole. So now you have the filament coming out, and then lock it into these clips here. Just turn around and click it in, and then that's having the filament mounted on it. We just had to come back from a pause. I forgot one essential piece of the setup that we don't necessarily include with the box is a sheet of paper on it. So after you have the machine up to this point in time, I do have the unit plugged in and turned on, but we need to level the build plate. This is important to make sure that your 3D builds, everything knows where it's at for calibration side of it. And so I'm going to have Ed zoom in here to the display, But you do require a regular sheet of paper to do this. I'm going to have Ed zoom into the display. And through this menu, it's a series of push buttons, up, down, left, right, and the enter button on it. And we're going to come down to Utilities. And once we're on Utilities, I'm going to go ahead and press the red Maker button. And then come down here to Level Build Plate. And I'm going to hit the button on this part of it. Things will start to move. You want to make sure you don't have anything in this area, in the build area or whatnot. It's going to do a calibration so it knows where all the pieces are at. And then if you come back down to the menu, there's actually a set of instructions that tells you what you're supposed to do. It'll say loosen some knobs on it. I'm just going to kind of run through the pieces on here. And you want to set the paper up on the build plate, and it's going to move first to one spot. And what you want is, when you move the paper, and right now this one's actually set really good, you should be able to feel that there's a little bit of resistance on the paper when you move it. You don't want it so it's hard to move the paper. You don't want it to be really loose on it. So when you get to this point, if it's loose or tight, if you reach underneath here in the back, this will be up high enough, there are 3 knurled knobs. If you can, they'll be silver underneath here. You can't see them probably on the video. And if you turn them clockwise underneath, that'll tighten it up, pull the plate down, that'll make the paper looser. If you turn it the other way, it'll make it so you just feel that tension on it. So right now this is good, so I have the tension on it. Then I hit the M button again, and the head will move to a different spot. And the same technique, you want to turn around and move it. If it's just a little bit of resistance is all you want to feel on it, that one's good. And it's going to move over to a third point. Same thing, that's all working out pretty well. Then it's going to say it's going to want to do a double check on everything. And so it's going to do the same thing. You'll turn around and it'll go to all the different parts of the screen, of the table, move it. And that's all set up. So when it gets done, it'll jump out of that menu on it, and that'll be the table calibration part of it. So again, it's important to make sure that that build plate is leveled and that dimensions on it, or you'll have some problems with the filament sticking to the build plate or your print's not coming out correctly on it. So after you have that done, remember I said we were going to leave this particular part of it out. We're going to tell it to load the filament into the machine on it. So we'll come back to the utility screens here, and one of the options that's in that same utilities is change filament. And if you click on change filament, 2 options, load or unload, and we'll just click on load. So at this point in time, the unit actually kind of works like a hot glue gun. And so right now it's heating up the hot end of that tip. So it'll take a little bit of while for the temperature to come up on it. So it's in heat up mode right now, and it'll take a little bit on it. And it's when it comes up, we'll probably put a pause in the video here in just a little bit. And then as soon as the element's up, it's going to make some noise. It'll tell you that that next step is, and then we'll get ready to push the filament in through the load hole. When the head is up to temperature, you'll hear that kind of beeping noise, a motor will kick in. After you level the build plate, the next step is to load filament. So if you remember where we left the step on the back, that we left this guide tube and the filament out of it. One thing you'll want to check before you load the filament is how the end of this tip looks on it. Sometimes when it comes out, there'll be like globs and it'll not be smooth on it. If you have a problem with it, either take a scissors or a nail clipper, or even sometimes a filament, you can just turn around and grab it, wiggle it back and forth and pull it off. So you just have a straight edge. Otherwise it might tend to jam while you're loading it on it. So the unit's ready to load filament at this point in time right now. So we'll come back down to the controls, and we're going to go to, again, the utilities menu, hit the M button, and I'm going to come down to change filament, and I'm going to hit load. Now the unit's heating up, and it'll take a little while for it to normally do this if the unit's cold. Actually, this time we had it's warmed up, so it shouldn't take quite as long to have it come up. There is like a little progress bar on how close the temperature is coming up, and as soon as it's ready to go, you'll hear it make some noise, and then you'll also hear a motor kick in on the print head, which is up here on this side of it right now. Okay, if you heard the noise and if it's coming through okay, you'll hear the motors running on it. So you'll take the bare filament, and there's a hole in the top, slide it in, and then the motor will start pulling the filament into the unit on it. And what is settling down here is what we've got to do is we're going to wait till we start seeing that the filament's starting to come out, and we'll let it run for a couple inches here on it. And once that's done, we just hit the M button in the middle, and that just acknowledges that the filament's loaded on it. When you have that done, take the guide tube, and you'll actually just slide it directly into the bigger hole that's on top of the unit. And at this point in time, the printer is ready to operate. So at our next step, I'm going to have you show you how to do a print off of the SD card that comes with it, just to make sure that the unit's working properly. Now the unit's ready to print. I always recommend that after you get to this point on the process on it, that we print something simple, it's easy to print, just to make sure everything's going to work correctly on the printer on it. So the unit would have came with an SD card, should be installed into the unit. If not, it'll be in that supply box that you had on it. And there's a slot right here on the top. Put the card into the unit till it clicks. And then again, when we come down to the menu part of it here, we're going to come up and it's build from SD. And there's a couple test prints that I would recommend that working on it. And the one I'm going to print here, because it doesn't take very long to print, is, come down, called chain linked, and it'll be a little section of like a chain holding together when it prints on it. This typically takes about 10 minutes to print, and you know, kind of like when we did the build on it before, it'll take a little bit of time for the head to heat up to temperature on it, and then as soon as the temperature is heated up on it, it'll start doing its print process on it. So while it's doing that, so some important things on where you have the unit set up as. So if you want to make sure that you don't have any air conditioning vents or air blowing on the unit, that'll affect how you have the print for it. So you really should want to have it someplace that the temperature is fairly stable on it, and that you don't have any air blowing directly into any of the holes on here on it, or otherwise it could affect the print, and sometimes you'll end up, it'll stop adhering to itself, and you'll end up with a big pile of spaghetti, plastic spaghetti that'll sit in the unit on it. So right now the heads came up to temperature, and it's going to go through and start laying down a little bit of material right here. And then it'll go right into its print job here on it. And so that's going to be coming up to it. So like I said, it'll take about 5 or 10 minutes for this chain to print on it. With that, we'll kind of come back a little bit, and you can kind of see how this particular project moves on. So while this job is printing out, I want to show you one thing that you really need to be careful about this machine. It is a pretty common cause of what would stop print jobs from completing correctly on it. So while it's printing, I'm going to slowly turn the machine around. I don't necessarily recommend that you do this while the machine is printing, but for the sake of the video here, we'll do this part of it. But as you see, the filament spool here is pulling filament up into the part of it. So a lot of times you got to watch out of how this comes up. If it unspools like this and gets tied in a knot, anything that'll jam this filament from going up to it will stop the filament from coming through. So the print job will get a certain point, and then all of a sudden you'll just have air. So it got part of the job done. The printer will still keep moving like it's printing, but it doesn't necessarily know that it's not getting any filament on it. So always kind of keep an eye on it. Make sure that the spool runs freely on it. Occasionally, if you pull it out, make sure that there isn't a knot, like the filament didn't turn around and pull behind a cable, so it's like where it pulls hard and it's like it's looped on it. You want to make sure that the filament spools off of the spool correctly on it. So number one thing, if that that you want to make sure on, is just how the filament's loaded. Again, you want to see how the filament comes straight up from the bottom of it into the tube, so it's no kinks or anything on it. That'll make sure that you have best chances for a successful print. Okay, well, that's the unit got done. When it gets done, it'll go ahead and start moving the build plate down so you can get to it. And after everything kind of moves off to the side, all you have to do is come up, and this particular one you can grab here. This is a nice little connected 5-link chain or whatever that came off of it. So I'm going to call that a successful print. Once you have that, you should be able to just about print any project on it. Your success may vary if it's student-ran projects and stuff on it, but you'll have to maybe experiment if things don't come out right on it. But most of the time, if you follow some guidelines that you'll be able to find on other YouTube videos and stuff on design functions on it, you should be able to have it set up. So that's the basics of the printing part of it right now. So in our last step, I'm going to show you how to just unload the filament and how to get ready to pack it up. And we'll come back to that in just a second. Okay, so now if you're to the point where either you're out of filament or it's time to box up the unit and send it back, the last thing you'll need to do is unload the filament. Now you leave the filament in, if you have the unit for a week, it's okay to power the machine off with the filament, leaving the filament in, but you do need to remove the filament before you send it back to the AEA. So I'm going to go through that process, things to look for on it. So I'll have Ed zoom back in down to the menu side of it again here. And when we get down there, basically, it's the same place that we've been on it. We're going to come down to the utilities menu, change filament, and we're going to hit unload. And just like on the load part of it, after you do that, you can go ahead and pull this guide tube off, and so you can actually see the filament on it. It'll take a little bit of time. The print head's going to heat up again, so it heats up, melts the filament, and as soon as it's ready, it'll come up and say, give you some alert tones on it. And what you'll do is you'll grab a hold of it, and as soon as it starts making noise, you can kind of feel it pulling out. The motor will be pulling it back out. And if it ever stops on it, then you can go ahead and give it a good tug, and it should come out on it. So you don't want to pull on it before everything heats up, or you might end up leaving a plug inside the box, which might make it harder to print for the next person on it. All right, now if you heard it comes up, it made some tones. It's pulling out. You can feel it kind of pulling up. I can feel it pulling up. It got to a point to where it stopped. I'll go ahead and, there's also a little lever here on the side. If you push down on it, come up with it. Now when it comes out, you can kind of see here that there's actually like a thin pair of filament and even a little bit of a bubble on it. So I'm going to go ahead and hit the M button. I'm going to get to the point where it's unloaded. Again, this is what you don't want to turn around and push into the printer while you're loading it on it. So, even then it's a good time, just break that part of the filament off and throw that part away. Then you can spool it back onto the spool. And then to get it ready for loading, just kind of go back through how the unboxing worked and just do everything in reverse. Again, make sure that when you do it, you take out this guide tube so it's not laying on here, because otherwise it gets kind of crimped and will cause some bends in it we don't want to have happen on it. And just put everything back in the way it was. And so that's most of that part of it. Inside the box, you should also find a sheet of troubleshooting tips. So if you have problems with it, go through that sheet. And then if you still have problems with it, you locate the contact information at the bottom. You should be able to contact me. Now, granted, I do other things during the day on it, so I might not be able to help you instantly on it, but by all means, go ahead, contact me, and best probably by email. And then as soon as I get that information out, I'll try to help you out on that part of it. So hope you enjoy working with the printer. It's a real hoot. So have a good day and take care.